in the different sectors of the economy. This plan came out, the deal, in December last year. Since then, of course, we have been hit hard in Europe and in other places around the world by the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we have seen over the last months is to try to react very quickly to the pandemic and to take it forward. And I think many people have been asking the question, is it still feasible for the European Green Deal to go ahead as it was envisaged? And I think on the next slide, you will see in terms of the recovery that is being proposed, what is called the Next Generation EU is to stimulate the economy. And what you see here is an overview of the different facilities that have just been proposed 2 weeks ago and that are now being discussed in Council and Parliament on how we think in the Commission we could propel the Next Generation EU and use it in order to put us on the right track to a climate neutral, digitized economy that also has a higher strategic autonomy in the future in the coming years. This is an addition to the multi-annual financial framework. 750 billion euros is proposed to be committed mainly in the years 21 and the year 22. And maybe I'll pick up a few things here in order to show how innovation and research can play an important role. First, there is, and that is the biggest pillar, is the support that goes directly to member states. Because we know that member states they have already put up their own recovery programs, their emergency programs over the last months and weeks, and they will continue to do so in the coming weeks. And their public budgets are going to be very much strained. They will also be strained because economic activity has gone down. So the income, the public income in member states is going down. So therefore, the largest part of the support will go straight to member states. But it will have to go there for a purpose, because this is money that we can only spend once. I don't think that we will have the economic strength in Europe to put up another program like this in a few years' time and then to talk about the Green Deal. So we will have to marry that. So it means when member states are planning to use the funding from the Recovery and Resilience Facility, they will have to very clearly show how this is linked to the Green Deal, how it's linked to the digitalization, how is it linked to improving the strategic autonomy of Europe in the coming years. These plans should come over the next months, and there will be a dialogue to be held with member states on how to take it forward. And I mentioned very clearly before that the success on the Green Deal will hinge on how fast you can push forward innovation in Europe and modernization. So all the sectors I've been mentioning could be part of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, but member states can tailor this to their own needs. And a similar way, there's some windows like the Just Transition Fund, which looks at particular regions in Europe that might be particularly facing particular challenges with respect to the transformation. And these are at the present point in time, particularly the coal regions in Europe, because one thing is very clear, that we will have to move out of coal in the coming 20 years in Europe if we want to clean up our energy system. And that of course means a large restructuring of particularly the regions that are dependent on coal. And this is a dialogue that has already started and that is going to continue. And with the support that is being proposed, there can be help in economic diversification. The second pillar here in light blue is trying to support directly private investors. And that's not only private investors, but it's also could be regions or it could be municipalities in Europe through what is called Invest EU. So that is something our programs that you have seen in the past, the Juncker plan, for instance, was trying to invest directly into the economy. And here the proposal is to upgrade the Invest EU, which has particular a sustainable infrastructure window that is going to fund projects, particularly in the areas of energy, mobility, industry in the coming years. And these could, for instance, support things like green steel or clean cement. So it will be there in order to foster also innovation in the coming years. In the mobility sector, you could think of many municipalities rolling out new bus systems that run on hydrogen or on electricity. So to really make sure that we move into a clean future. A new facility has been added to the Invest EU, or in fact, two facilities. One is the Strategic Investment Facility, and that is particularly going to look at where we as Europe have a strategic interest in certain industries in order to make sure that we get the complete value chain into Europe. One aspect here could be, for instance, batteries. At the moment, Europe depends very much on battery manufacturing and cell manufacturing in Asia, and we have a clear strategic interest to bring this to Europe and also to turn this into a new circular economy, part of the circular economy in terms of battery recycling. So these could be strategic investments that could be taken there. There's many other areas in the Green Deal, in the sectors that you could find as these are strategic investments that we require. Also in the area of digitalization, for instance, where we depend very much on other parts of the world and where we need to do more. Finally, in that pillar, there is solvency support. And here one could particularly think of those companies who are very innovative, who come with the technologies of the future, but that are suffering at the moment from the COVID crisis, to try to make sure that they stay afloat in the economy, that they will survive this pandemic, and that they can then produce the innovations and the research in the context of the Green Deal. So also here, there is a very clear link to the Green Deal that can be taken. On the last pillar, which is a little bit of a basket of everything else, because it concerns civil protection, EU for Health, which has a huge research and innovation component, and also Horizon Europe. In Horizon Europe, I think there is a particular link made on one side to the health sector, and the other link is being made to the green transition. So there is particular programs under Horizon Europe that will be strengthened in order to make sure that we produce the innovation that we require in the coming years, so that even in the recovery period, we do not stop to innovate in Europe. I think that is going to be very important. So this 750 billion euros comes on top of the multi-annual financial framework. And if you want to see in terms of the orders of magnitude, the next slides gives you an impression on how this is going to look like. So here you see these are the main headings in the multi-annual financial framework. So these 7 headings, I think the colleagues in Parliament are already discussing and negotiating for a while with the Council. And you see the blue part here is what is the regular budget. So this is the 1,100 billion euros over a 7-year period. And then you see on top of this, the Next Generation EU, the orange part, this is the 750 billion euro. And it shows how strong the recovery is, how much money there is going to be injected into the economy. From our point of view, this is a bold program in order to reignite the economy across Europe. Finally, and I don't think I have to say a lot of that when it comes to the Horizon Europe program, because you were speaking yesterday to Jean-Éric Paquet. On the next slide, I have the structure of the Horizon Europe, but I don't want to go into detail on this one. Just to say that when we think of an increase in the money from the recovery, it's particularly going to be in the areas of digital, industry, space, climate, energy, mobility, and of course also in the health sector. I think these are going to be the main areas where you will see the increase, and that is going to serve particularly the European Green Deal. Something that is not mentioned in the graph here is that we also have additional funding for innovation. And Roland was so kind to point me to that at the beginning. And that is what is called the Innovation Fund. As of this year, the European Commission will have additional funding available that comes from the European Union emissions trading system. As you know, under the European Union emissions trading system, there is allowances being auctioned, and part of that auction income is channeled to the Innovation Fund. And kind of the decision was taken about 2 years ago when the ETS directive was agreed between the European Parliament and the Council. And the Parliament was very instructive in shaping the structure of the Innovation Fund. In the meantime, we have been working very hard in order to make the whole Innovation Fund operational. And maybe some of you have been part and parcel of the extensive consultations that have been taking place with industry in particular to make sure that this is an instrument that is going to complement Horizon Europe and that is providing added value to the whole Commission program. So the decision has been taken just a few days ago that in terms of the implementation, because we as Commission are not the ones who will be implementing the day-to-day work of the Innovation Fund, is going to be done by INEA. So that is the Innovation Executive Agency that also for the proposed Horizon Europe 2021-27 is going to be strengthened in terms of its role in the context of research and innovation in terms of the Green Deal. And we have been working hard to come out with the first call for proposals during the course of next month. So when I look back 2 years ago, that was the aim, July 2020, to come out with a call. And I think we are on track to really have everything in place and come with the first call. The value of the first call is going to be around €1 billion. So that comes from industry through their contributions via the EU emissions trading system. And it is the energy sector and the industrial sector that is going to benefit from it, in particular when it comes to large-scale demonstration. And that is the real purpose of the fund, to support large-scale demonstration. And again, and I'm sorry that I always come with the same example, the green the hydrogen for the steel industry could be one of those projects, but also projects in the cement industry, in the glass industry, in ceramics, so all energy-intensive industries. And we have been looking into what is in the project pipeline and discussing with industry over the last 2 years. And there could be as many as 180 proposals. So we could see the Innovation Fund largely oversubscribed. But let's see. The call will be open for 4 months until the end of September. in that period of time, we hope to get many good examples and proposals for projects that could be funded. What we will definitely also look at is in how far these can contribute to the recovery. Because I think one of the things we often see during a recession is that companies, unfortunately, are first cutting their research budgets. So that might have an impact in terms of the appetite also for the Innovation Fund, but it also shows how important public spending is going to be and to make sure that this is going to come out very soon. So let me conclude so that we get to the question and answers and the discussions. On my last slide, number one, what I'm very clear of is that without research, without knowledge, without innovation, we will not make it to a climate neutral Europe by the year 2050. So therefore, research and innovation is a key ingredient for the repair and the recovery from the COVID crisis, as well as it is at the heart of Europe's new growth strategy, which is the Green Deal. The Commission has proposed to strengthen Horizon Europe in that respect in order to support the green and digital transition and to foster Europe's strategic autonomy. And the additional instruments for innovation should be deployed as swiftly as possible. And that maybe that's a plea to all the parliamentarians that are listening, that we really need to make headway and we need to move quickly in terms of decision making on the recovery fund and also on the multi-annual financial framework. The proposal has been on the table for 2 years. It's time to conclude the negotiations between Council and Parliament in order to make sure that we can really deliver for the benefit of the European economy and for the benefit of the European citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very clear and complete overview in the area of the green transition. This is highly appreciated. Meanwhile, our chairwoman, Mrs. Carvalho, joined the meeting. Well, she's here already for quite some time, so she could listen to what Mr. Runge-Metzger said. And yeah, I would like to give her first the floor. Please, Mrs. Carvalho. Your microphone, please. Your mic.
I think that now you can hear me. So good morning to everyone. Good morning to Artur, welcome. I couldn't give you the welcome before your presentation because I had some problems connecting, but I could hear all your lecture. That was very clear as always. And my first point is that I would like to thank Artur Runge-Metzger for his presence here. I know that he has a very busy agenda. DG Climate is right now with a large responsibility with the European Green Deal and a lot of contribution for the recovery plan. So your time is precious and we are very grateful that you could spare some time to join us today. This college has placed climate action and all the questions related with the fight against climate change as at the top of the agenda, and DG Climate at the front line of policy making, central to the whole policy making inside the Commission. And I found this special rewarding. Artur, you know that I have a special care for your DG, and I'm very happy with this. And allow me a personal note. I have known Artur for many years. I was trying yesterday when I was thinking about this to see, to look back and to see where we first start working together. And I think that was up to COP5, if I'm not mistaken, in Bonn. I think that you were already there. And at the time was for the preparation on the entering into force of Kyoto Protocol. So I don't say how many years ago it was, because you can start doing accounts to see how old we are. But the ones that are more familiar with the climate change will know when it was the COP5. And I have said that I have learned a lot with Artur, not only in the climate change, because he's one of the persons that I know more specialist, but also because he is a fantastic international negotiator. And if we have today a Paris Agreement, a lot is due to him. So we have a lot to thank him, because he has been always a fantastic negotiator in name of the European Union. But now he is also a crucial commissioner official in developing the future, the Green Deal, and how the recovery plan is going to be built based on climate neutral economy. And that is very important, and it's good that we have people like Artur also developing these new policies. And as he has said, technology is central to all of these. If we don't want to change, and I think we don't, to change completely our way of life, of course we have to adapt to be more, to have less impact on the planet, but we don't want to stop completely our traveling or to have comfort in our houses. And if we want to have this and to be compatible with the fight against climate change, we really need to have more research and technology, so we can have clean technology that will allow us to keep a certain level of our way of life and to have a cleaner planet. This was very clear in the presentation of Artur, and I will, to finalize, I will ask him mainly three questions. The first one, you have talked several times, you have given the example of the clean hydrogen. Hydrogen has been a project that has been up and down in the Commission. It was already several times in the agenda of the European Commission. I remember at the time of Mr. Prodi, he was quite fun on the hydrogen. He has launched the hydrogen partnership, public-private partnership, that is a fact today, is quite successful. But when we look to concrete instruments for the hydrogen economy, we have mainly this partnership that is part of Horizon 2020 now, and will continue for sure to be part of Horizon Europe. But you need much more than that, because in that case you need technology, but we need a lot, as you have mentioned, you need infrastructure. If you are going to use hydrogen for mobility, and this is one of my questions, are you thinking also to use it for mobility, or only for projects like you have mentioned, the steel industry? Because if you are going to use it for mobility, we really need to have an infrastructure that has to be cross-border. And how are we going to coordinate with the member states to make sure that in their flexibility, because the recovery plan gives a lot of freedom to the member states, how we coordinate to make sure that they also align in the same projects, so that we can have European projects that we are so much in need. This is I gave the example also with the hydrogen, but is true for other projects, that we need to coordinate with the member states to make sure that in the budget, because they will have most of the budget, they are also aligned with the with these projects. My second question is exactly on the mobility, and what about the electric mobility? Still a lot to be done. Is also part of the recovery plan. And again, the infrastructure is going to be a key point. And my last question is on in the innovation fund. You were to explain the innovation fund. It is a very important program because we really do not have anything of this amount of budget for the energy intensive industry, and we need to keep the energy intensive industry in Europe, and we need to decarbonize these sectors. But the demonstrations that you are talking about are very costly, and so I'm afraid the innovation fund is not going to be enough for the demonstrations that are required. And so do you foresee that you can have the innovation fund can have synergies with the regional funds, so that the regional funds in the places where the site is located can finance part of the infrastructure, and the innovation fund would fund more the innovative parts of the project? So this is my question, and I really thank you for your presence. And I pass to Roland, because I think that Artur will answer everything in the end after the presentations. But Roland, you are the moderator, so I pass to you, and I thank also the presence of all the speakers for this very interesting discuss. And I would, if Artur doesn't mind, that we can have your slides, because are really quite clear, probably the ones that I have seen more clear on the recovery plan, very well explained. So if we could have, I would appreciate. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you, Graça. I'm sure that we can have the slides, and we will be able to distribute them to all the participants. If you agree, Artur, we take the questions after the intervention of Hans. So I saw you took notes. Thank you. And then I would like to pass the floor to Hans Arne Frøystein, who is the chairman of EURAMET. It's a public-private partnership under the Article 185 of the treaty. EURAMET is a member of K4I and brings together national metrology organizations. So here I will stop. Hans, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Roland, and also thank you to Artur and Maria for their good words there. And it's a pleasure for me to be able to address you briefly here on metrology. There is some slides, just 3, I think. So you can
come up.
Excellent. Go to the next one. So just as a starter here now, the metrology, which is the science of measurements, is not about the weather. This is what we call a horizontal discipline, and it serves as a sort of a backbone for industry and trade. It's an ancient activity coming all the way from the weights and measures thousands of years ago, but now it's even more important. Yes, go back to the second one, please. Very good, thank you. So it's for industry and trade, as mentioned, but also to address what is written here as Europe's key societal challenges. Of course, they are global, many of them, and it ranges all the way from clean and renewable energy, measurements related to these, and to a secure and healthy society. And of course, now today's topic is about the Green Deal. and things associated with this. I should like to mention also these days when COVID-19 is everywhere around us, that we also have themes in our research projects, in programs, which are focusing on measurements related to health. A couple of examples of projects there, just to give you a flavor. We have one relating to standards for in vitro diagnostics for respiratory diseases, of which COVID-19 is one, and also for cancer. Another one, which has also been directed now recently into the use for fighting COVID-19, is a project led by our Portuguese member on drug delivery. So we also have a strand into that direction, which is slightly different. And many of the member institutes also are heavily involved in testing and developing protective gear used in these and medical devices as well used in this current pandemic. And of course, the traditional for industry is that we want to have a global cooperation, global trade. So if a part for an aircraft is produced in the Czech Republic under the Czech metrology and quality assurance system there, it should fit snugly into the production line, whether it's in the UK, in France, in the US, in Brazil, or whatever. So the Czech system must be of high quality, so must the Brazilian and the US and the French one. And there we have this metrology infrastructure globally and distributed to the regions here, where we assure that we are comparable, that is high quality. So this makes this kind of backbone for all activities related to measurements. And again, as I mentioned with this biostandard, regulations and standards is also key topic here. So we have a strong focus that metrology and in general science and facts should be the basis for decision making. So the next one, please. So when talking about these research programs that EURAMET runs, we have been running these since 2007. They have brought together world-class measurement expertise to strengthen our position in terms of innovation and also contribute to economic prosperity. So we have done not only objectives relating to solving problems in various sectors, industry and societal challenges, but also to directly contribute to the turnover and economic activity in our part of the world. So actual and projected sales of innovative products that has been influenced by the programs amounts at this stage to 1.6 billion euros. And the early adopters of the first program say that 352 million euro are directly attributable to the program. This is a 400 million euro program. And this figure is already a few months old and it's counting and increasing. So we really stress this importance of contributing to the economic impact and the turnover in industry as such. So the next one, please. The last slide I have now is about metrology support relating to the Green Deal. We are, as you know, preparing to establish or are proposing a new partnerships on metrology on the Horizon Europe. And we have been encouraged by the Commission to start preparing before contract a call already in 2021 now for metrology supporting the Green Deal objectives. I should mention some of the other themes under the running programs where we have a very strong track record, for instance, in environment and in energy. We have around 40 projects in each of these topics. In environment, it's on air pollution, water, ocean and climate observation. Under energy, it's about examples like rail transport, electromobility, gas, both quantity and composition, development of smart grids, which was also already mentioned. We focus on the sensors and the measurement side of this, which is a key issue too, to facilitate such grids, metrology for windmills, etc. And in all these, we have very close collaboration with industry, regulators, and standardization bodies. So we have a track record where we could contribute further into this next year's call. And we are developing our structure to have what we call European metrology networks. They are covering specific industrial and societal issues, including energy, climate, environment, health, and so we have a link with the pan-European stakeholders to make sure that we are really able to respond to these in the years to come. So this is very briefly about metrology as such, as a generic competence used. It's sort of a hidden gem in society, but I think through these activities that we have done and what we plan for, we can really contribute a lot also on the Green Deal development. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Hans. I think this was an example of how the different initiatives, European partnerships, and we have quite some also in the membership of K4I, all play a role. And well, it shows also the necessity that they all work closer together. We have Spire, we have Emiri, we have Photonics, so we have lots of the partnerships, and we continue this discussion on the Green Deal in a working group that we established under the Pact for Innovation, which is about greening Europe, and we will have regular discussions, and we are very glad that we had this great presentation that will stimulate our discussions. And I have some remarks, for example, from Philippe Jacques, who is the Secretary General of EMIRI, the Energy Materials Industrial Research Initiative, who is very pleased to hear so much about hydrogen, but he says, well, let's however also keep in mind how important it is to support other complementary technologies such as batteries and enabling technologies such as advanced materials, obviously digital. Maybe Artur can say a bit something on that also after. Unfortunately, our other MEP speaker, Mrs. Sirpa Pietikainen, she was not able to join, and this is why I suggest now to give the floor back to Artur to answer some of the questions and the comments, and then we will take 2 or 3 more questions from the participants. Please, Artur.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the kind words, and looking back in history already. It's a long time. On clean hydrogen, I think I think it was yesterday or the day before, I said to somebody, somehow this hype about hydrogen at the moment reminds me of a hype we had on carbon capture and storage about 12, 15 years ago. And we had big expectations for things to change very fast. But I'm an economist, so I'm looking at the basic facts and figures. And in the end, it's the economy, isn't it? And I think what was, I think, underestimated is that the CCS would still be a very expensive technology. It would have significant running costs, and at carbon prices we have seen in the market, it was just not a technology that could be carried by the market. And I think hydrogen to a certain extent is the same. Of course, we use already today in industry significant amounts of hydrogen in different industrial processes. And most of that is being produced, what's I think color-coded as gray hydrogen. But that keeps our industry running. Kind of, if you would ask, I think those industry guys to move from today to tomorrow to other forms of hydrogen, they would clearly say, but then I price myself out of the market because the costs in producing hydrogen, whether it is in the blue or in the green fashion, is going to be much more expensive. So the real task for us in the coming years is to make sure that we can bring down the cost of hydrogen so that it becomes competitive in the market. And there is, of course, the avenue looking at the use of renewable electricity and electrolyzers. So scaling up the size of electrolyzers and bringing down the costs of those is something that is part of the research agenda. And that is, as everybody knows, not cheap. It is expensive. And just to then come to the second question, yes, the Innovation Fund, I spoke about €1 billion, is not going to fund the entire project. We are talking about a maximum of 60% of the incremental costs. So the fundamental part of the research project will have to be financed either by the project proponent or by other investors. We have learned quite some interesting lessons with the NER 300, which was the predecessor, where in the end, and one of the famous projects is the wind float in Portugal. For a long time, it was impossible to come to a financial close with NER 300 money only, even if it was grants, because the other part was missing. When we then invested money into the Innofin, then it was possible to fund the other part of the project with funding via Innofin. And I think there's more ways of doing this. You mentioned the regional funds. Yes, there might be some appetite from some member states to use the regional funds also for innovation. So I think there is a possibility to do that. Of course, what is important also is that projects that fall under the Innovation Fund, there is the issue of state aid that we will always have to look at, that we don't overdo it. But I think there is significant amounts of funding available. But it's not going to be sufficient for all the 180 projects I mentioned that are somewhere in the drawer in Europe, which would bring certain technologies up to scale. So we will need to also look at Horizon Europe very carefully, what the cluster 5 and 4 can deliver on this. And we need to look into getting private sector money mobilized with the help of the colleagues in the European Investment Bank or with the help of the national promotional banks. So that is something that we will have to look at in the coming months. So, and that's also something we will look at from the Innovation Fund side in a very active manner. Because what we want to make sure is that we don't only get good project proposals, but that they also get off the ground as quickly as possible. And as we get many projects proposals at a relatively early stage of project maturity, it will take some time to bring them to maturity, and we want to be active in that. We don't want to leave the project proponent on its own in that respect. The last one was on, the other question was on hydrogen and mobility. Look at the long-term strategy, which says, yes, hydrogen is going to be used in the transport sector. But the applications there might be shipping, might be heavy trucks, and to a certain extent, maybe the car fleet, but not predominantly. There, I think we will see electricity. I think just the pure physics in terms of energy efficiency will point you to probably a higher use of electricity in the field of cars and maybe vans, particularly if they go short distances. I think there they have a competitive edge in the end. And that this is, of course, also linked to infrastructure. That is quite clear. Therefore, the Green Deal and also the recovery programs say we should invest quite a significant amount of money into, for instance, charging points across Europe. And that could also be hydrogen charging points. So it's not only left to electrocharging. Well, I think that answered your questions, Maria.
Yes, I think, Maria, I just pass on the floor to you. Your mic, please.
I don't want to speak too much, but I just want a short comment on the what has been said. I fully agree on the hype of hydrogen, and I have worked in the research on the hydrogen field for many years. But is like a little bit of the CCU. Is not only the economics, is also the thermodynamics, as you have said, because the energy balance needs to be seen, and the hydrogen solution should be when there is not a simpler, from the thermodynamics and economic point of view, is possible, like some of the mobility in shipping and in big trucks. Again, like the CCS in 2000, in the recovery plan of 2008, 2009, and that I didn't like the solution at the time, but it went on and was not very successful. We have to be careful and to learn the lesson for the hydrogen, because for me there has been, at the time there was already that solution that I advocated and I advocate now, the renovation of the buildings. I think that the renovation of the buildings is something that, if you have time in the end after answer to the other questions, also to comment on that. The renovation of the buildings gives a lot of jobs, uses materials that are local, and is, from the economic point of view and from the energy point of view, is quite positive results. So I see as a good solution for recovery plans, and I think that we should invest a lot on that, with positive consequences on health, on well-being of people, and we really need that all over Europe. But I think that other attendees also want to comment and questions to Artur. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Graça. We will try to connect Greg Arrowsmith, who is the Secretary General of EUREC, which is also a member of K4I, and he has a particular question. Let's see whether we manage to connect him. Otherwise, I will bring the question forward that he sent us through the chat. Oh, he's here.
Hello. Hi.
Greg.
Thank you for the connection.
It was not foreseen and very spontaneous, so please.
Exactly, which is why you're getting in my t-shirt, I'm afraid. Thank you, Artur, for this exposition of the European Green Deal. I had a question about climate earmarking. Back in the old pre-coronavirus days, when it was only the MFF on the table, the Commission decided on a 25% earmark that would cut across the entire MFF for climate-related activities. Now, as part of the EU recovery, as well as the MFF, we also have the next generation EU instrument providing 750 billion. I went through the texts. I didn't see in that a clear reference to having a climate earmark, and that somewhat seems a little bit inconsistent, because when presentations were made of the Next Generation EU by Ursula von der Leyen and by Commissioner Hahn in the European Parliament, both of them said that the earmark did exist, which makes me wonder why I didn't see that in the text.
Mm-hmm. Roland, do you want me to go straight onto the question, or
yes, please,
collect a few? Okay. Yeah. Greg, thanks for the question. I think it's very clear from the structure of the Next Generation EU, because the Next Generation EU is not a separate pot of money that sits outside the European budget. It's going to be budgetized. I think that was a very important political message towards the co-legislators, to say that this is a fund that is democratically controlled, and is not a fund that sits outside, where, for instance, you would not have an oversight by the budget committee of the parliament. And the whole MFF has this 25%. And maybe as a person from DG CLIMA, I should say the 25% is not a ceiling. It's the bottom, it's the minimum. And I think with, if you read very carefully the communications related to the recovery, you will see that if we manage to do all what is said in the political communication, I think we should by far exceed the 25% at the end of the day in terms of climate relevant spending. Graça, on your suggestion on the buildings, I 100% agree. And that is, I think, one of the major parts that could benefit from the recovery package, because what we have seen over the last years is that we have been slowing down in terms of energy efficiency improvements. We haven't made really energy savings in Europe over the past years. So therefore, this is something where a lot more needs to be done. And that is also the reason why the Commission announces the renovation wave. We at least have to double the renovation rate, and that's also clearly said in the recovery package. And that is, for instance, where the big lump of member states' money under the recovery and resilience facility could play a major role. And this will have an immediate impact on the local economy because it's construction, but it's also looking at how can you make sure that the remaining energy you require in the buildings is going to be decarbonized. So the whole question of improving appliances in the houses, the link, the electrification, probably the heat pumps that come in. So there's a lot that can be done, and that will have immediate impacts on the job market in Europe, and will stimulate growth. And in the end, it will benefit the citizens because their houses and homes are going to be more comfortable and probably even more valuable after we have done that wave of deep renovation. And I need to underline the deep renovation, because a lot of renovation that we unfortunately still see is not the deep renovation that is required.
Thank you, Artur, for these answers. I would like to ask one or two questions that are maybe not so easy to answer, but I think they are important. So, as we all know, climate is a global topic. We are not alone in Europe. We can not save the planet, so to speak, all by ourselves. And even if we can make this transition and install more wind energy, electrify the cars. We need materials, and we need production in the value chain and in the supply chain, where we depend partly, completely on non-European resources. Take the example of rare earth that is used for wind and in batteries. China is producing 90% of that, and well, the supply and also along the value chain is outside Europe. So this is what my first question. Do we need to bring back to Europe part of the production? Do we need to become more resilient and independent from global supply chains? That's my first question. The second question is looking at what happens in Russia with the fires at the moment, and with this whole big area of the tundra where the soil is defreezing. Huge masses of gases go up in the atmosphere, which maybe are even more damaging than what we emit from cars or houses. So is there any chance that Europe can help, or be a global player? Yeah, that's my two questions.
Mm-hmm. I think on the first point, indeed, climate change and fighting climate change is a global issue. I've been saying for years and years that even if we were to stop the entire European economy tomorrow, climate change would not stop from happening, because with our, now I think we are somewhere 8-9% of global greenhouse gas emissions, we have become a small player, and that's good. A small polluter in that respect. It's not small, but kind of compared to the remainder, it's of course very limited what we can do ourselves. So therefore, the global climate negotiations and cooperating with countries outside Europe is going to be eminently important. And one way of doing that is what we have shown in the wind story and also in the solar story. That if we create markets in Europe, if we fund the research, we can bring down costs. And that is going to also benefit other parts of the world, because you will see the amount of investment into wind energy in China, in India, in the United States has gone up dramatically over the last years. And that was thanks to a lot of the development and the foundation that has been laid in Europe in terms of research. And I think that's also something Hans Arne was referring to when he spoke about the hidden gem of metrology. If we do a good job, this is going to become an industry to our benefit. And it's also right that the question of rare earths is something we have been contemplating in the EU for some time, and it's not one that is easy to respond to. But I think one of the big responses, and we are going to go very strong on that, is the issue of recycling. So that in order to limit the amount of new materials that you have to get from somewhere else, live on the stock of materials that you already have accumulated in your economy. And there we all know that we can become much better. I don't have to talk about the waste streams that are really being wasted still today, despite the fact that they have very valuable rare earths in them, but that are not recycled at the present point in time. And it's giving a completely new industry a life. And I think the big ticket at the moment we are talking about is batteries. If batteries is becoming such a central element in all our applications, and particularly in the cars, it's a huge battery market that is going to come into existence. So this is something where we need to get things right from the beginning. So the battery regulations that will be proposed during the course of this year, before the end of this year, they are going to be very important. They must be able to stimulate and create a completely new market, a completely new value chain. And that we will have to do in many other areas. The final point on this one is, I think that the COVID crisis is showing us what are the risks that come along with globalization. Because as soon as global supply chains start collapsing, you will feel it immediately. And we have seen this in the health sector in particular, and maybe we have taken it too far. I'm not in the camp of those who talk, when they talk about strategic autonomy, of we need to be autark in things. No, we don't need to do that. Trade is beneficial, and we should continue to do trade across the world. But we also need to be mindful of the risks that come with it and be prepared so that we don't fall into a trap and have major economic disruptions. On the last point, the adverse impacts of climate change itself, whether it is on permafrost in Siberia, I think there the risks are known for many, many years. The scientists, the IPCC, have been telling us for the past 25 years already that this is going to happen. Stopping the thawing of permafrost, I think there is no technology that exists. The only thing we can do is reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that goes into the atmosphere. When it comes to fires, this is something we will have to even deal with in Europe. And I don't have to mention Portugal because it's happening everywhere in Europe in terms of fires. We will have to become smarter on how to make sure that we can avoid and reduce the risks of fires. And there's a lot to be done in the coming decade. You have seen the first graph, which shows how much we will also have to rely on CO2 removals, and that vegetation is going to play an eminent role. But this is only going to be possible if we take care of our vegetation, that we have in the different locations in Europe the right mix of forests and trees, and not those who are very vulnerable to droughts, that are very vulnerable to fires. So we also need to adapt our forest management. And again, this is a big issue in the context of the Green Deal, the farm to fork strategy, but also I think something that member states will have to look at in the common agriculture policy. The whole issue of adapting the farming and the forestry sector to the adverse effects of climate change that are going to increase. They are not going to go down in the coming years.
Yes, well, thank you for, again, a clear answer. I would like to come slowly to the end of this webinar and would invite Hans and then at the end, Mrs. Carvalho, to say a few concluding words. Please, Hans.
Thank you very much. Maybe just to pick up a little bit on what on your question and Arthur's response here to this. We have a Green Deal for Europe, which is not the biggest slice of the world. I think that within our programs, we try to cooperate and collaborate with entities globally, like we do in our research programs. We have participants from all parts of the world. And I think also that this is a sort of a long-term development of our cooperation on all levels over the world. And I believe also that if you look onward, it would be important to have some what you call quick wins or some results that are visible, shows that, okay, when you go in this direction in Europe, it's good not just for the greenness, but also for the economy. I think this is something like a pilot, which maybe we should sort of show to the rest of the world that, okay, we can do this and it works. And this is the only way to make it happen also on a global scale, I think. You must unmute, Roland.
No, I was. Well, it should work. Can you hear me? Yes, I would like to give the floor for a final word to Mrs. Carvalho, and then we will slowly come to the end.
Thank you very much. First, Roland, thanks for all the organization, and thank you for Artur and Hans for speaking on this webinar. It was a very interesting for me. Was a very clear presentation on the next generation EU, and on some of the details, all the projects can be organized with the member states. So it was very useful for us. I particularly am very pleased with some of the statements of Artur, that he said that the fund, the Next Generation EU fund, is a democratic control fund that is music for the ears of the MEPs, and that it's going to be budgetized. I also like these European Brussels kind of words, and this is now a new one that is on fashion, but is very good for the European Parliament, because if not, we wouldn't be controlled by the European Parliament and voted by the European Parliament. I think that not because of us MEPs, but it's a sign that we are the ones that are directly elected by the people. So it's a sign that there is a democratic control, not only in the voting to accept the budget, but after to control it through the budget control, through the execution. That is also very important. And I also want to reassure, because it was also mentioned, that we are working even remotely, some of us, we are working 150% to make sure that everything is going to be approved very soon, before the holidays, and that so that we should not have a gap between the present MFF and the next one. This is very important, because it happened already in the past sometimes to have a gap, and this it's terrible for the stakeholders that need to have continuation on their projects, on the people that they employ, and we cannot afford to have this crisis on top of the big crisis that we have. So we are doing everything that everything is going to be on time, the full package of the MFF, the recovery plan, and also the what we call the MFF files. So the agriculture, the Horizon Europe, the EIT, the regional funds, so the space program. So everyone is working really hard to make sure that everything is ready, so that January next year we can start with the programs as foreseen. And we would also even like that some of these, and I think it's possible, some of these financing will arrive to the member states even before. So during the autumn, we can already start financing because they are really in need of some liquidity, especially the SMEs. So we are very conscious on the urgency, and we are doing everything that we can to make sure that it will happen. Of course, there is a lot of details, especially on these novelties of the next generation EU, and how to make everything coherent, and to make the link between what is decided and run centrally in Brussels with the ones that are run in the member states. There is these 2 points that we really need to work to make sure that when we have a European objective, everyone is working towards this objective. And we are a bit afraid in the parliament, or at least some parts of the parliament, that some of the member states, because they are in crisis, we understand we lose some of this budget to replace their own normal public budgets, and will not invest that in future projects. We are worried about, because this is really for the future of Europe. We are borrowing. Some of this money is money that needs to be repaid. A large quantity of this money needs to be repaid. So it's more than fair that we invest this money in projects, not only for the day-to-day life of the countries, but in projects that prepare the future and the life of future generations. So we count a lot with the Commission to have a very important role to make sure that the projects are really projects of the future, on new technologies, innovative projects. And I think the Commission can have the back of a large percentage of the Parliament to support this approach of investing, really investing in the future, and not just to spend it in anything, just to spread money around, or in projects on old technologies. So it should be really invest on next generation EU. So thank you again to all of you. Thank you, Artur. Thank Hans, and congratulations, Roland, for this the organization of this seminar.
I would also like to thank all of you. It was very interesting, and what I take with me and for Knowledge for Innovation is what Graça just emphasized. It's not only about repair, it's not about continuing as usual, but really focusing on an emerging future that we need. We need emerging technologies, we need emerging markets, we need emerging new players and stakeholders. So it is really this emerging future that we would like to support, in particular from Knowledge for Innovation, and with our discussions and with the platform that we provide to debate and network. And hopefully by the end of this year, we can organize the European Innovation Summit in the beginning of December. And by then we will have put everything in place and can launch Horizon Europe and can launch the new future with very clear and concrete commitments and investments, and with a focus on the future. And I hope our future, we can make it bright together. And yes, this is what we all, I think, will jointly work on. Thank you very much. And we will continue with our series of virtual events tomorrow. And during the month of June. And you're all welcome to attend and ask questions, participate. Thank you very much. Artur, thank you very much. Hans, thank you very much. Graça and the other participants. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, Graça.